which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledged its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been taken care by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lake regions. Now I'm gonna pass it on to Shreya and
So the agenda for today will be, so as we've already welcomed you all, we would be allowing our speakers to introduce themselves from 6:10 to 6:35 p.m., which will be followed by a short presentation. And after that, we shall open the floor for a panel question and answer where the participants means you all could ask questions to our panelists today regarding all your questions for psychotherapy, for clinical counseling, and sorry, for clinical psychology and counseling psychology. After that, we'll have a small activity break and we shall end the event at 8 p.m. So just a few ground guidelines, since this is an online event and we want to be mindful about time. Please do continue to stay on mute if you are not currently talking. When we do open the floor to ask questions, for all of you to ask questions, please just use the raise hand feature under participants to ask your question. We'll call on you to ask your question, and once you have been addressed, please lower your hand so that we know that we have called upon you. Of course, during the open floor, questions to the chat are welcome, but also if you're able to raise your hand and you're able to unmute yourself, we would really appreciate that, as it allows a flow of conversation and should also avoid the chat getting flooded with questions. And also, before we do begin, we also want to let you know that the event will be recorded to accommodate students who are unable to attend because of the time zone differences and other issues as well. But we also want to let you know the recording will not display your names, so that will be all right. If you want to speak to ask your question but are uncomfortable with your face showing, you can keep your camera off if you wish to. Finally, if you're able to leave your camera on, please do. We want to try our best to mimic in-person events as much as possible.
So before we move on, I'd just like to ask if anyone has any questions about the guidelines that Shreya just mentioned, or any questions about the agenda, please let us know. I'll give it a few seconds before I proceed. Okay, I will proceed then. So I would start off by introducing our panelists today who have taken the time to be here. And yeah, like I'd just like to say a big thank you for being here with us today, because we know how important this is to us and to all the students who are present here. So thank you so much. First up, we have Dr. Sarah Tuck. I'll pass it on to Dr. Sarah Tuck to introduce herself, if that's okay, Dr. Tuck.
Sure, if you call me Sarah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah Tuck. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, so I practice in both clinical psychology and neuropsychology. I am a York U grad from, I don't remember when, but I did the clinical developmental program quite a while ago. And my email then was stuck at York U. So that's who I was. I was stuck at York U for a very long time doing my clinical degree here, and I really got great training here. I completed my PhD here, and then I went to do my clinical internship at the Hospital for Sick Children at Sick Kids, where I concentrated in neuropsychology, but also did some therapy and counseling, or sorry, not counseling, but therapy and intervention. I later completed my postdoctoral fellowship at the Hospital for Sick Children. So I worked with a variety of medical populations there and their families. And after that, I totally shifted gears and worked in community mental health, which was way closer to home. So now I work at ROC, Reach Out Center for Kids, which is a community mental health agency in Halton region. So Oakville, Burlington, and Milton, Georgetown, and Acton. And I love it. And I do predominantly clinical psychological assessment and consultation. And then I also do neuropsychological assessments when needed. I'm also one of the 2 psychologists that are on the Halton fetal alcohol spectrum disorder diagnostic team. So that's part of my job as well. And I like working with the families and kids there too. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I will now move on to introduce Dr. Jaan Reitav. Next slide, please. Yes, if Dr. Reitav could take the pleasure to introduce himself.
Yes, hi. So I'm Dr. Jaan Reitav, and like Sarah, I attended York University. I did my my master's and PhD there in clinical psych. And it was too many years ago. I started 45 years ago. I began my undergraduate studies 50 years ago. So really, really long time ago. Like this is the prehistory of psychology. But I thoroughly enjoyed my time at York. And back in those days, it was beyond where the city finished. Anyway, the training I got was fabulous. After I graduated with my PhD, I worked at the Toronto East General Hospital, now called the Michael Garron, doing a lot of work in the programs that they offered, individual and other. And we had a crisis intervention unit, so lots of experience. We had an outreach program into the Native community, and I supervised a psychotherapist and clinical psychologist who were Indigenous. So very exciting. And then from there, I went to the chiropractic college where I taught, and also did a number of consultations in their clinics. Got really excited about working with medical issues, patients who had different kinds of medical problems. And 15 years ago, I went to University Health Network, which is part of where I am now. I work there 2 days a week. I work in my own private office 2 days a week. And working with patients who've had heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, arthritis, just a whole range of different health issues, which have really knocked them down. And most of those also impact their psychological well-being. And very many of them also have sleep issues. So sleep is the area that I am sort of certified in. I'm a diplomate in. Behavioral sleep medicine is a really important part of clinical work with all kinds of patients, psychiatric and medical, and it's an exciting field. So happy to answer questions about any of that people want to ask about. And thank you for inviting me to this great occasion.
Thank you so much. It is all our pleasure to have all of you here today. I will now move on to Shlomo Radcliffe. If Mr. Radcliffe could, yeah, thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Shlomo. I also went to York. I guess that's why we're all invited back. I'm actually really excited to be here because as a student, I attended one of these events myself. So it's kind of a bit full circle for me to be back here. I completed my bachelor's at York and I completed my master's at Yorkville University. And I decided to go back to Yorkville University to start a doctorate, which I'm currently engaged in at the moment. And my area of focus is working with people with primarily issues related to anger and anxiety. So that's pretty broad, but I do get a particular focus of the mix of anger and anxiety that I'm working with. In addition to the work I'm doing as a therapist myself, I do have a private practice where I have a number of therapists working with me all around the anger and anxiety picture, working with individuals and couples as well as children. I guess individuals are children too, but I guess there's a distinction. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Last but not least, I will now love to introduce Trisha K Williams. If Ms. Williams could please take over the floor.
Sure thing. I'm so happy to be here. I'm also a York U graduate. I did my undergrad here in psychology at York University. Then I moved to Vancouver and I did a Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology at Adler University. I work specifically with emerging adults that are going through transition issues. I do have a private practice called Metamorphose Counselling, and the transition issues are life transitions, career transitions, and relational transitions. So I do work with couples and families as well. I started off working in not-for-profit agencies, specifically I like the Salvation Army and West Coast Family Services. So I used to work with caseworkers and social workers, dealing with individuals that or families that were going through separation and divorce and need to identify co-parenting. So I have a gamut of different experiences. I also worked with Kids Help Phone. So there's a whole bunch of different experiences that I have. So coming into a pandemic and needing to work online, I was very happy to have had the experience at Kids Help Phone, because there you're only talking to people on the phone and you're doing chat messages and doing a counseling via chat. So that was interesting too. So if anyone wants to talk about counseling online, I would be the go-to person for that. But yeah, very happy to be here and to share here at York U. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. And with that, we all are familiar with our panelists, whom we're truly honored to have today, because they're York alumni, and I know it must feel great to be back to York, but I just want to mention that we are grateful to have you here back today. So before we move on and open the floor to our panelists, I will briefly go over the career pathways in psychology. Yes, to begin, I'll begin with clinical psychology. Clinical psychologists provide assessment, clinical intervention, and consultation for behavioral and mental health issues and severe psychopathology. They cater to people dealing with intellectual, emotional, psychological, social, and behavioral maladjustment, disability or discomfort, minor adjustment issues, and also severe psychopathology. In order to become a clinical psychologist, one requires a bachelor's degree, followed by a master's degree and doctoral degree, which can be in the form of PhD or PsyD. And postgraduate studies take approximately 6 to 8 years to complete. Our panelists will be able to speak to that later, but there's also a requirement for licensing and certification after completion of after completing the doctoral degrees, and the requirements vary province to province. Moving next to counseling psychology, counseling psychologists provide therapy, assessment, and intervention for emotional, social, work, school, physical health concerns, and address problems from developmental, cultural, and environmental perspectives. They address school, work, or career adjustment concerns, stress, trauma management, relationship difficulties, mental disorders, organizational problems, learning and skills deficit, and etc. So one generally requires a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. However, the requirements vary according to location, as I already mentioned, and the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association requires a master's degree to provide the certification. Lastly, moving on to psychotherapy or talk therapy, that addresses a broad range of mental illnesses and emotional difficulties, which encompass a diverse range of services, including marriage therapies, CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, art or music therapy, and so on. The difference between a therapist and a counselor can be seen in their educational background and clientele services, especially because psychotherapists may provide short or long-term treatment, and they cover a diverse range. And they help people who face difficulties with coping with their daily life, trauma, medical illness or loss, specific mental disorders, and so on. So the College of Registered Psychotherapists, Ontario, they require a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and training and education that is related to psychotherapy. And these have to be endorsed by the registration committee. Now we will open the floor to the students who would like to ask their questions. Just a friendly reminder to use the raise hand function. And if you have a question, you can easily put that in the chat box or just ask by raising your hand. Once you are called on, you can unmute yourself. If you have to ask questions in the chat box, please do so as well. If you struggle to come up with a question, you will now be provided with a document which has a few questions outlined over there that is there to guide you. But just to remind, this event is so that you are benefited and you can ask all the questions that you have in your mind. So you don't necessarily have to follow the document, but that is just there to help you or guide you throughout the session. And you are highly encouraged to keep your cameras on. It is just a better way to connect and interact with our panelists. So we will now begin. Thank you everyone for being here. And we will start taking questions now. So, okay, I see 2 participants raised hands. I have Ricardo Samayo. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right, but please go ahead with your question.
Hi, you can just call me Ricky, but
Yeah, sure.
I just had a question because I'm looking to be a therapist. That's why I I've always wanted to help other people. That's why I changed my major to psychology. And I also have heard that you can get your doctorate, like go straight to your doctorate after you do undergraduate, or would you need a master's to do that first? Or like, what would you recommend?
That usually depends on the school. So there are some schools that go straight from, your bachelor's into your doctorate. And if you decide to stop midway, they'll give you a consolation prize of a master's. Like that's how it is. So they kind of skip a step. I'm not saying this nicely or politically correctly, but that's who I am. So I'm sorry. But there are some programs in some schools that you go straight from bachelor's through to your PhD. I believe it was a zillion years ago when I started. I started in 2002, which is not a zillion years, but it's enough for it to be foggy. But I believe at the time when I was applying, maybe Ottawa was, doing that. It was a straight through, but there are programs that go straight through. There are other universities that require you to do the master's first. And when I was at York anyway, they make you do a master's with a dissertation, and then you do your PhD after that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so moving on, I have Beth raising her hand. Would you like to go ahead?
Yep, hi. I can't see myself for some reason, but hopefully everybody can see me. I'm not sure. I have just a question for everybody. If you think that it's better to so I'm in the honors program, and I'm a mature student, obviously, and it's really hard to sort of navigate through going back to school after being out so long. And I'm used to school being put together like each course, and this is what you take, and this is what, right? But with the honors, I found out that you pick whatever you want. And so in all of your opinions, do you think it's better to follow what the course load would be that they would give without honors, or to actually take an honors? And I also have just one more question after that.
Okay, thank you, Beth. If any one of the speakers would like to attend.
When I was at York, I remember that it was important to do the honors program, seeing that the 4 years was going to be important for you to have the honors thesis. I don't know if the program is the same now. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but by doing the undergraduate psychology, the 4-year program, and going through the honors program, doing your thesis at the end was important in gaining experience when it came to research, which is going to help you with your master's. And if you're going to go to PhD, it would be very helpful. So that's how I'd answer that.
Well, thank you so much. And just one more question actually to Tricia, to you. if you work with youth and transitioning into adulthood, why didn't you pick a master's in social work instead? Why did you go with counseling psychology? Or yeah.
Because I think that I'm offering a lot more than just working with youth transitioning to adulthood. So that is one life transition, that's, you know, preteen, and we all go through that. But I also work with other demographics too. So my age group is from anywhere from like 16 all the way to like 40. And yes, you might think 40-year-old going through a transition. Yes, we do have individuals that have career transitions that are happening around that time. We do have like older individuals that are changing jobs all the time and needing to navigate what that looks like. And we have individuals that are getting married or having children, right? And that happens within this age group. So it's not just the teen years.
Yeah, I guess I would add one more thing to the question you asked about the honors stream. So when I went to University of Toronto back in 1970, they started exactly that kind of an option where you could choose courses from just about anywhere. But by the end of the 4 or 5 years that you were getting your degree, you had to have to meet the requirements of one or another department. And I think what it does is it allows you as a student to explore a variety of different courses, different material, which is very, very important. None of you, I'm sure, as you're starting, know where you want to be. And the only way you know is by dipping your toe in the water in different courses, different areas. And I would say not only is a variety of courses important, and hopefully, you know, going to doing some kind of a thesis, that's a good preparation for most master's and doctoral courses, because you will be doing research at some point. But I would also highlight the importance of doing volunteer work, because it was one of the things that I did when I was in undergrad, and I actually volunteered down at the old Queen Street Mental Health Center. And for me, that was quite an interesting experience. It was difficult. We worked with, you know, hospitalized patients with serious issues, but having a chance to shadow the psychologist and attend groups that he was running with him really made a huge difference for me in terms of understanding what I wanted. So volunteer work is not just doing something out of the goodness of your heart. It's also beginning to understand different options, different things that you can do in your career. And it's also, I think, very important for any applications you make for graduate schools at any point.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a 4D amateur student, so I know pretty much where I want to be. And yes, the volunteer is amazing. I've had a lot of chance to help with things, not specifically as a volunteer under that volunteer, but had a lot of life experience. So that's why I kind of want to make my education like as, you know, quickly and good as possible. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Before I take a question from the chat box, I'll let another participant raising hand. Yeah, I'll just let someone else go. I see Nika raising her hand, and please go ahead with your question. After that, I will get back to the questions in the chat box. So thank you for your patience, everyone.
Hi, I just wanted to start off by saying thank you. Already had a lot of questions answered, but I think someone else also asked this question in the chat, but I think Mr. Radcliffe might be able to answer this. It's more along the lines of seeking a master's of counseling. If for someone who's interested in going into psychotherapy, there's not many actual psychotherapy programs in Ontario or Canada, but I was just wondering if you could become registered as a psychotherapist after or easier if you even take a master's of counseling psychology.
So the nice thing about if you're trying to register in Ontario, the CRPO actually has a standing list of all accredited programs. And that's really the best way to get registered as an RP. To just look at the list of the programs that are already there, and ideally take one of those programs. The master's, it's actually kind of interesting. I don't think you necessarily even need a master's to be registered, the master's in counseling to be registered with the CRPO. There are various certificate programs that some people do, like a 5-year. I know, for example, I think Gestalt has a 5-year certificate program that would have you graduate as a registered RP. So I would just say look at the CRPO's website because there's lots of options there.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Radcliffe, and thank you, Nika, for your question. I will now take a question from the chat box. So I have, sorry, just give me 1 second. The chat box is flooded. So I have Trisha asking, what experiences are possible for clinical developmental neuropsychology to get into the clinical program? I'm assuming so. Yes, if any one of the speakers could just provide some insight about that.
I think maybe that would be good if I could answer that one. I don't know. So what, sorry, can you repeat? I'd like to read the question, but I can't. There's so many questions. What was the question again? My working memory is terrible.
It says, what experiences are possible for clinical developmental neuropsychology to get into the clinical program?
Okay, so to get into, I went to York when there wasn't a separate clinical neuropsych program. Now there is. And so I did, I had to backdoor and get all the extra courses and do, neuroanatomy online and do all sorts of other things and try to work my way in there and get all the courses. And I did it because I was pretty motivated and I loved it. But now it's much easier. So there are different streams of clinical psychology, and the clinical the clinical developmental stream has a neuropsychology stream directly that you can go into for grad school. So they have at York. I know that UVic also has a neuropsychology, clinical neuropsych stream. Windsor, University of Windsor also has that. So there are a number of universities now that have that stream. I honestly learned most of my neuropsych in, I don't want to say this, but in clinical experiences. Probably the true. I had great courses, but then it was my practica, my working for other private practices with other neuropsychologists, and then doing my internship and postdoctoral fellowship at SickKids. That's where I got so much rich experience. I don't know, I sort of got the impression that somebody was asking, what do you do afterwards? Afterwards, you work in a hospital, you work anywhere really, but in a hospital, there's a, that's where I always thought I was going to land and stay. But I was there for a number of years, and then I switched to community mental health, where I use my skills mostly with more like the FASD and substance exposure, with developmental ASD assessments, things like that. But you can also, there's a lot of private practice. Before COVID, I also was involved at a private practice. I've cut down now to deal with monkeys at home, honestly, but that's why I've cut down that. But you can work in private practice as well. There's a lot of motor vehicle accident stuff that you can do if that really excites you. I like doing CAS assessments. I do, when I was in private practice, I did a lot of children's aid assessments, and that was, I like that. So that's probably how you get in and what you do after.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I hope that answers the question. I will now move on to Synthis. You have your hand raised up. Would you like to ask your question? Okay, great.
You're muted.
I will move on to the next participant, if that's okay. Synthis.
Sorry, I thought I unclicked the mute button. I have one question for Sarah, and I have one question for the whole panel. Sarah mentioned that you worked in a hospital, SickKids, and I was wondering if you had any advice about like getting a position within a hospital.
Work really long hours and do lots of research. Honestly, They're big. I love the clinical work, and research wasn't as much my passion. I was good at it, but I didn't like it quite as much. The people who get hired with permanent positions, they have lots of research and lots of publications. That's being honest. So I don't know if that I see other nodding, so that makes me feel good. But yeah, okay.
And then for the whole panel, I was wondering if you guys have any suggestions about making a strong application for either a master's or a PhD application.
Well, I'll start to get it going. Back when I was applying to schools, there was a tremendous frantic fear that you wouldn't get in anywhere, that the demand for spots was so high and the number of students applying were so high. And probably that hasn't changed much today. So I ended up applying to 6 different schools all around Ontario, and I think into Quebec. But the one thing that I would urge any student to do before they think about applying is actually go, if they can, to visit some of these other campuses or where they might be studying. Go to the campus, poke your head around. There are student centers and places where the students hang out, the psychology students, and sit down with them and talk to them about, what it's like there and what they do and who the professors are. All of that is very important. For one of the things I did that I think helped me a lot, because my grades were okay, but they weren't stellar. I was never a straight A student. I was someone who did what I loved, and sometimes that led to some marks being less, B pluses and whatever. So, but what I did that helped me a lot is I went to the campuses. I also knocked on doors of professors to find out what they were studying, what kind of work they were doing. And I tried to find, before I went, 2 or 3 professors that are kind of, we're talking about things that I was interested in, just to see whether their interests and mine overlapped in any way. And I do think that was one of the things that helped me get into York. So when I came, Dr. Morris Eagle accepted me as his student, and we worked on a number of projects together. So it is important that the human side of applying is just as important as the academics and the volunteer work and everything else. So, but try to do your homework if you can. Get out to places and talk to students and see what life at that spot or that university is like before you apply.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Another thing that I would suggest too is to look up as much as you can about the university that you want to go to and see, does it align with your values? This is what I did. So I did the same thing like Jaan there. I applied to probably like 6 or 7 different places. I didn't get into most of them. I think I got into one, and I didn't like the location. And then the other one, it was probationary acceptance. So it was quite interesting. So Adler was one I chose, and because Adler aligned with my values of community engagement, social justice work, and such, I had written a very strong statement because of that. So I would say, research the university, like Dr. Jaan said, and, see, does it align with your values? And that will help you to be able to put your all into the statement.
Another thing I would add would be that to really take advantage of the admissions advisor of any given counseling program or psychology program you might be interested in, they're pretty motivated to get you to enroll a lot of the time. So speaking with them ahead of time and asking them these questions or other questions you might have about the program can really help you get off to a good start and set up your activities and your classes and courses in alignment with whatever the requirements of the program might be.
And just to add really quickly, I think if you have the opportunity to have, you get into multiple schools, check out the supervisor who would be taking you as well, because that's huge. I was really fortunate to have two amazing supervisors at York, and it was Dr. Harvey Mandel, and he was a mensch, and he passed actually during my grad stay, and it was like it was so awful, but he was a real mensch, and I am grateful for the time that I got to be his student. And then I had another amazing student supervisor who's still there, Mary DeRoche, and she was amazing. And a good supervisor can make the difference of how you get through grad school, how quickly you get through grad school, all of these things, helping you with funding, helping you with all sorts of things. So if you are lucky enough to have multiple kind of offers, really see who you would be working with as well. Not just, and even if it's not as pretty a campus or something, I pick the supervisor. That's just me. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. I just want to ask Synthis if your question is answered, so I can move on to the next person.
Yeah, one thing a lot of my TAs have brought up is getting onto research programs with professors and saying that really helps as well. And I just wanted to get some confirmation about that.
I think it does help you get in. I don't think it once you're in though, there's a lot of other things that are going on, but yeah, I can definitely help. Especially in terms of getting letters of recommendation and things like that, to be known by someone that can write you that kind of letter. That's always helpful.
Thank you. I will now move on to the next participant. Yes, please, Alan, you've been waiting for a long time. Please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, when I first started, I didn't even have a beard. So anyways, I went to York in 71, believe it or not, straight out of high school. And I lasted 2 weeks. I was intimidated by the large lecture halls and the reading lists. So then I found out that they waived the tuition when you reach 107. I know I look pretty good for that, but anyway, so I decided to come back, and I will be graduating this May with an honors BA in psychology. My GPA, I can't tell you what it is because it would sound like I'm bragging, 8.5 out of 9. So anyways, my question is this. When I quit York, I went into acting. And for most of my life, I've been impersonating the Marx Brothers. In fact, I probably, John, I'm sorry, how you pronounce your name? John? Is it?
Oh, Jaan, you mean?
Jaan, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just like in the morning when you wake up and
Jaan, yeah.
That's why I went into the sleep field.
Yeah. Most people do that when I do stand-up. But anyway, so yeah, I was doing the Marx Brothers. I'm saying that you probably would know who they are. I was doing the Marx Brothers for a while at Universal Studios theme park, but I was also a regular on a series. I was a comedic sidekick, and I've done stand-up. So what I want to do is get into the psychology of humor. This question may not be relevant to this particular Zoom session, but I want to get into the psychology of humor. I know that there's a Professor Rod Martin who wrote a book called The Psychology of Humor, and he taught at either Western or Waterloo. I think one of them he went to, then the other one he taught at. So my question is basically, how would I progress from here?
You might want to look into, there's been a big movement in recent years, I think, to look at the processes that underlie a lot of the successful psychotherapeutic approaches. For example, with an ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is one of the main modalities that I use, there's a few different processes that are understood to really contribute to that therapy being effective. And
I'm sorry. What therapy did you say this was?
It's ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
Acceptance, what?
Acceptance and commitment therapy.
Oh, it's called ACT. Okay.
Yeah, ACT. And one of the processes in ACT is something called diffusion, which is basically allowing people to get some space from different thoughts and experiences that they might be having that basically taking too seriously. And humor is recognized as a big component of diffusion, and there's actually been, I think, some research in the ACT literature on the use of humor and how that works in psychotherapy. So that might be something to explore.
Oh, did you say regarding diffusion?
Yes, diffusion. I can put in the chat box.
Well, is there I grew up with a stone and chisel. I'm not great with computers, but is there either a phone number or an email address that you could give me so I could, you know what? I want to write it out completely. The A stands for what?
It's acceptance.
I have provided it in the chat box as well for you, Alan, just to make it, yeah.
Oh, okay. So, or did you provide a
Just the
an
name.
email or a phone number?
Yeah,
For the app?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat box.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks.
And while you're doing that, just to say that any site, like any good therapy or even assessment, Harvey always used to say that, you know, treatment can be serious, but not somber, right? So a good use of humor at the right time and the appropriate time, it can actually be really help with rapport building, really build that kind of therapeutic relationship. So if you actually want to study the psychology of humor, then you have to find a supervisor who's already doing that research. But if you want to just incorporate it into your practice, then good on you, because, you know, a lot of us try to do that as well. Maybe not as artfully as you do it, but, you know, a little bit here and there.
No, actually, well, I wanted to ask you, yeah, I mean, I would like to get in touch with a professor that specializes in that, but does anybody... Now, is this, do I contact you, Shlomo, at angerandanxiety.com, and you can...
Yeah,
further...
I'm happy to pass on some resources related to humor.
Oh, okay. So I'll email you at that, and then we can go from there?
Sounds good.
Oh, thanks. So, Sarah, now, well, anybody, are there certain... Well, I guess you'll give me that information when okay, whatever. You know, I'm starting to sound like Woody Allen. Incredible. Okay, so let me go to the chat, and you're awesome, Alan. Oh, who said Beth Wheaton? Oh, that's awful nice of you. Thank you. If I was only 50 years younger. Well, I thought it was funny. Okay, all right, thanks. So I guess I'm finished. I should shut up. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And before I move on to the next participant, I would like to take a question from the chat quickly. So I have someone asking that I see that counseling and psychotherapy are separate on your list. I'm wondering if you do a counseling master's, are you also trained to do psychotherapy? Are there certifications after your master's something you get on your own outside of your master's? I can clarify the questions of the speakers one, but I think this she's just asking for the difference between counseling and master's and psychotherapy and the certifications after the master's program. So
I can speak to the difference between counseling and psychotherapy a bit. It's really vague and ambiguous a lot of the time. The main practical difference at the moment is that counseling is not a regulated term, whereas psychotherapy is. So in order to say that you're practicing psychotherapy, you have to be a regulated professional under the Psychotherapy Act within Ontario, whereas technically anyone can say that they do counseling. So psychotherapy has a bit more of recognition and as well as regulations and professionalism around it, I would say, than the term counseling. That being said, counseling is a process that I think most therapists and psychologists as well are, most counselors, most psychotherapists rather, are using regardless of their training or a particular title.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to add on to that, just to clarify, because a lot of people have questions regarding that. So Someone who's pursuing a master's in counseling psychology, how would their career path differ from someone who's doing psychotherapy? Like after their bachelor's degree, they're just pursuing psychotherapy and they're being a registered psychotherapist. If you could provide a bit more insight into that.
Yeah, so to clarify, a lot of the master's programs that would allow you to graduate and with the goal of being a registered psychotherapist, they are called Masters in Counseling Psychology programs. So it does get confusing, and you could become a psychotherapist by doing a counseling psychology program. You could become a psychotherapist by doing a certificate in a psychotherapy in a pre-approved program. But it's really about the regulatory difference between the term counseling and the term psychotherapy.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I don't know if this is going to clarify it or confuse it further, but I think for me anyway, the most important difference is that psychotherapy is using your academic knowledge of, let's say, behavior, emotion, cognitive processes to help people change their life, reduce symptoms, etc. And to be registered, it's not so much what you take academically in your master's stream, it is the application. So getting supervision, seeing patients, usually patients or clients in a setting in which training is occurring. That's what you need if you want to become a psychotherapist, psychologist, or psychological associate. So it's getting the applied hands-on, work with patients, getting supervision and how to handle some of the many difficult situations that we have to deal with day in and day out. So it's very much at the registration level. So the College of Psychotherapy, the College of Psychology, College of Social Work, that's where that's usually handled.
Thank you, Dr. Reitav, and I hope the confusion is somewhat clarified for everyone who's been asking that question. I will now.
I think there was an addition at the end of their question that talked about additional training after you do your master's. And I would say that specializing when you're done, you I guess in your master's, they do sort of give you a gamut of different methods that you can choose from. But after you've graduated, that's where you'd go and specialize. For example, I use Bowen Family Systems. So you'd have to go to a college that teaches specifically Bowen Family systems therapy, and it's like another maybe 2 years or so depending on how much you want to know, right? So there's also satir, and there's also CBT, and there's also all these other different methods, and if you want to specialize in those methods, then yes, you would have to go and do extra training in those methods after you're done your master's.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. With that, I will move on to our next participant who has also been waiting for a very long time. Please go ahead with your question, Rand.
Okay. Hi. Sorry, I'm very nervous. So I've already started my applications for my master's programs. I'm applying to 5 different universities, and it's a very tedious process. So any advice that you can give on, I actually have 2 questions. My first one is, it can really be just a yes or no, but do you need like research experience and research and publications in general to be successful in the fields, like in general, moving on? Or can you kind of just go off of your volunteering experience and your day-to-day experiences in different areas of the field?
Well, I'd say I have a student right now who's been working with me. He's a U of T student, graduated last year, went through applying to, I think, about 8 different schools in Canada and the US, and he wasn't accepted at any of them, which shocked me because he's had awards in his fourth year of study. And anyway, but he's a sharp guy, and he said, okay, I need to do more. And so he'd worked with me on a research project. He worked that up for publication. He got that published. We're now working on a COVID study together. So you don't know how easy or hard any particular school is, but I would say don't give up. If this is what you really want to do, just figure out how you can get the credentials, the background, additional training, doing some research. Just about every university or hospital has some research going. Find out what they're doing, and if there's projects that you could apply to help out with, you're going to learn a ton, and you're going to bolster your CV, and eventually you'll get into where you want to get into. So it's not a slam dunk. It's not necessarily that you create the perfect application. A lot of it depends on who else is applying, and at least one of the things that my student found out is that with COVID, so many other people were kind of either out of work or deciding to re-engineer their careers, that the number of applications was just going way up in many, many schools. So it became much tougher to get in. But I would not discourage anyone. If it's something you want to do, figure out different ways of going about it.
I just add as well that if you think about it, people who are accepting you into grad school are academic professors. So they want publications. And if they see that you can do research and write up a paper and publish it, that looks good. So if you, it's the process, right? So, I mean, I did a lot of like research and publications, and then I stopped grad school. And then I did some at SickKids, and now I barely do any. And I read a lot of research, and I'm a consumer of research. And I am a part of program evaluation and some things in my organization, but it's a lot less critical. I think it was really helpful for me to be a great consumer of research and be critical and be able to evaluate things, and not read the abstract and copy the last line and say, oh yeah, that's good. So I try not to do that. I think research was really helpful in my career in that way, but I don't produce a lot of research anymore. I do all clinical work, and I'm a supervisor. I supervise residents every year at our program, and sometimes practicum students. And so the consultation supervision, that's my thing. But if you're trying to get into grad school, think about who's accepting you.
Okay, perfect. That really does help. It's just because I only ask because most of the programs, or all of the programs that I'm applying to, are like non-thesis based, or like they're course based, or they're not really focused on research. But that does help. Yeah, you just shrugged and like you really don't know. but yeah, I'm like looking into getting like summer research internships and stuff like that. So hopefully that'll help me with my CV and everything. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ren, and all the best with your applications. I will now move on to Parker.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of us probably, when we think about our future careers in psychology or whatever, think more about the therapeutic setting and like one-on-one and private practice and that kind of things. I'm just curious if any of you guys could speak about kind of like alternative jobs that you've had in the field. I know Dr. Williams, you talked about with like the online stuff that you've done, and even stuff with like social workers. And yeah, so I'm kind of wondering if you guys could speak about those more like alternative opportunities.
So I'm currently in private practice, but as I was building up my private practice, I was working additional jobs as well. One of the places that I worked was an agency that was just focused on just being part of a interdisciplinary team. So less a private practice setting, more focused on providing psychotherapy as part of a treatment team. Another really interesting thing that I did was working on an online platform delivering ICBT. So internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy, it was an online platform, and I worked as a therapist managing a client's therapy process through the program. So there do seem to be a lot of different options available. For sure, private practice is where a lot of people do focus and want to end up, but there are other things available for sure.
Some of the experience that I have as well, that's outside of sort of just therapy. So I do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So I work with a university right now, helping them to increase Black wellness on their campus. So that's also something that you can think about as well. If you're recognizing a need in sort of the social circles, right, where I guess, consultation is important, where people wanting your expertise based on your lived experience, then you can use, your therapy, I guess, education and experience to give consulting information to different organizations. So that is something that you can think about as well.
I used to work in private practice. I don't currently, because I like the balance of working in community mental health and then being able to pay for things. So I did do a little bit of private practice on the side to kind of supplement things. But I gotta say, there are people who love private practice and people who don't love it as much. I think I worked at wonderful private practices, but I love working in the hospital and community mental health agencies because there isn't that always the pressure to provide. It's less businessy. I'm a bad business person, right? So I much prefer doing the assessment. I'm predominantly assessment. As a clinical neuropsychologist, I do mostly assessment with kids and teens. So I love doing the testing and interpreting. I love getting on the floor and working with the kids. I don't like having to have a time limit. I like to be able to bring them back on different days and not have to worry that we're on the clock. So I also like working with the most complex of the complex. I get bored easily. So I do like to, I work with really, really challenging things that don't get looked at, cases that don't get looked at in the schools, they don't get looked at in other agencies within Halton. So we only see the most complex, and it's a passion that I have for it. Like, I really just enjoy it. So that is an alternative career to private practice. I don't think I'd be happy doing therapy 24/7 in a private practice. And I have friends who did the exact same program I did that do therapy all in private practice, and they're super happy. So there's lots of different, you just have to find the good fit for you.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think from when I started in psychology, I've always wanted to do more than one thing. And so I've worked in a hospital setting. I worked as a psychologist at the chiropractic college where I taught courses and also did consultations for them in their clinic. I'm working now at the University Health Network in their cardiovascular program. I do lectures at the Naturopathic College. So psychology is one of those things where there's a need for it in many, many different ways. People volunteer for, there's the Mood Disorders Association of Ontario. There's all kinds of places where you can find some chance to learn and grow. And if you volunteer or do some work there, there's openings that sometimes come available that you can apply to. So it's a pretty broad field. And I would say if you're looking for alternatives, psychology has all kinds of options, including working in business settings as industrial organizational psychologists. So lots of options.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. And our next participant is Eduardo, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Oh, yeah, it's Eduardo. So you pronounce it right, yeah. Sorry. Hello, everyone. I just have a quick question. I know this is a little bit of a personal question and a little bit taboo. So if you don't feel comfortable, like by all means, please don't answer. But I know a lot of people are worried about like GPA status and things like that on an application. And although it's not like the end all factor, I feel like all students feel like it's a very big one. So just wondering, what is like a typical GPA range that is suitable to like be accepted in a program? Because I know a lot of programs say like B+, but it's usually a lot higher than that.
I think it's 8.5 out of 9. So Alan can probably get in, but I think it does range. Like you said, the programs typically do list the GPA requirements. And I think, like Jaan was saying, it's going to depend on the pool of applicants applying as to how much your grades are going to matter. So obviously, all things being equal, the grades are higher GPA is gonna definitely count for something. But yeah, that's my answer. But also, if you're applying to the clinical psychology programs, it might be a different answer than it is for me.
When I was applying, I think it was like an A- was the minimum. They said B+, but they meant A-. I think they would consider B+ if there were other circumstances going on. I think they were trying to, if there's, I don't even know. I don't even remember what my GPA, I know it was at least an A- at this point, but I don't even remember what it was anymore. And that's how it doesn't, I know it's so big for you guys right now, but eventually this won't matter. Like it'll be fine. So, but I think for clinical, it may differ. It may be different now because it's now, a bunch of years. Wow, almost 20 years later. But yeah.
Yeah. And I guess, I applied well before Sarah did. So back in those days, they didn't have computers or online processing. You sent in your application, and then out of all of the ones that came in, they selected a bunch that got put on a table in the faculty room, and then the potential advisors would walk through and look through the different applications that made it onto the table and choose 2 or 3 that they thought might be students they might want to work with. So I think the answer is today, I'm sure they do a different process. It's all online, but you have to get onto the table. You have to have at least the minimum to be in that mix. And then once you're in the mix, you also need to have some indication, if you want to do clinical, of your ability to work with people, your sensitivity, diversity issues, ethics. All of those things are critical if you want to stand out. So you need somebody who you're working with either in a volunteer basis or in your coursework who can write letters that can kind of attest to your skills and abilities in those areas.
Don't have typos. Just don't. I read so many residency applications, and this is the next, like, a couple steps ahead of where you're at. But seriously, there's nothing that turns people off more, like, quicker than a typo. Get other people to read it, practice interviewing, just do the work to prep, because you've done so much hard work to get to this part that just polish it up at the end. Like, really, and I'm sure so many strong candidates out there. We want to be able to make sure that people see how strong you are, right? So.
Thank you. I guess I can add a little bit and answer your question personally, Eduardo. So I didn't have a strong GPA, just like Jaan, right? And I was also wondering, will I even get in, right? And the schools that did sort of accepted me on probation, and they did indicate that, when the reason they accepted me on probation was because of these other things that, our lovely panelists are talking about. You have a strong, volunteering, you have strong people writing, references for you. And also my values aligned with the universities, right? So in the interview, I smashed the interview as well, because I looked up and I researched everything. So they weren't just considering the grades, because you can do something about that once you're the right person for the school. So basically what they told me was, go and take this course or these 2 courses, increase your GPA, and then you're in. And that's basically what I did. So if you have everything else, then not to say you shouldn't have really good grades, but if you don't, it doesn't mean that you won't get in.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
So there's a little person that wants pepperoni, so I'm sorry. I'd like to point out that his father is also home, but I'm just saying.
So before I move on to the next participant, I will just take a question from the chat box. And this person asked, what career options do students have with an undergraduate degree in psychology in comparison to master's or PhD in psychology?
Do you want to practice in psychology? So for psychology, there's lots of things you can do, but I think it's harder to do. I don't know, maybe in the counseling side you can, but in the clinical side, no. Okay. In the clinical, definitely we're looking at least a master's in order to practice. You can work in a research lab. You can sometimes, even psychometrists, so the people that do testing now, they usually require a master's degree at this point, not always. So psychometrists are individuals who administer and score psychometric tests. Sometimes they're bachelor's level, but often a master's is required, especially within the hospital setting. So it's, if you want to practice within the field of psychology, at least the clinical side, and I'm sure that Shlomo and Tricia can talk to, and Jaan as well. But like, I feel like on the clinical, there's not that many opportunities with just the bachelor's, unfortunately.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll just take on another question which is related. So this person asked, do you need a bachelor's degree in psychology in order to do a master's in psychology?
Yeah, pretty definitely. I mean, all schools have their requirements, and you have to have a major in psychology. So you have to take enough courses in psychology. They usually expect that you've done some kind of statistics course, and there's other requirements as well. And I think outside of working clinically, just to kind of follow on the last question, there is now, if you're looking for alternative jobs in psychology, there is a whole thriving business in developing apps for different patient groups. Some of these is being done through hospitals, some is being done through private companies. But in all cases, I think you have to be really strong in data collection and management and statistics, because that's really, it's not only designing something, but it's testing it and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of what it is you're developing. So yeah, hopefully that helps a little.
I can add to that by saying Adler University, I know for sure, does take applicants from outside of psychology majors. So if you are someone who's doing maybe a minor in psychology and you have a different major, you just need to ensure that you have all the courses that they're looking for. And so I've had people in my cohort when I graduated, they came from being lawyers, they came from being in neuroscience, they came from, I knew someone who was an engineer, right? But what they did do is they had to go and do all the psychology courses. Maybe they didn't graduate with a bachelor's degree in psychology, but they had all the courses that the university was asking for, and they could provide that on their transcript. So as long as you have that, then you should be able to get into the school.
Okay, thank you so much. I guess that does answer quite a few questions that people have been having so far. I will now move on to the next participant, Masha. No, I don't know if I pronounced that right. I guess it's Maza, but please, you've been waiting for a long time. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So good evening, everyone. So my question is the way to get research experience. So when I enrolled in psychology a couple of years ago as a transfer student, I could get a thesis if I was an honors student, but then they changed it to the fact that you have to do specialized honors, and to become specialized honors, I have to take extra course load, which would add a year and a half to my studies. So I finished all my courses in April. I'm ready to graduate, but I have postponed my graduation from undergrad just to see if I really have to do the thesis, and I cannot find supervisors. That's one dilemma, to get supervisors, even for independent research, because alternatively, I said, I'm not specialized honors. I cannot take thesis as an honors. So maybe I can do independent courses, but then I still need supervisors to do that. So I really don't know how this research is important. Shall I just graduate and apply for different schools? And that said, my last year of studies was during COVID. So I didn't have the opportunity to go and meet with profs, go to their labs, do research. I was at home taking online courses. And it would be great if you could just help me. What are my options? And do I really have to take that research course before I graduate? Thank you.
That's super hard. That's a super hard situation to be in, right? I think COVID makes everything so much harder. Even when I'm looking at residency applicants, you know, the number of hours that they've done clinically, particularly in person, is way down. You can adapt your skills to online for therapy, but for assessment, it's harder. So for research, I mean, I didn't actually have a an honors thesis, and I got into grad school. I know I'm the minority, but I did have 2 independent study projects. So they were like 2 mini theses, and I had a publication out of it. So, you know, I think sometimes they don't look necessarily if you have a full thesis, if they realize that you've had research experience, if you can contact specific profs. I mean, maybe other people have better ideas, but even emailing specific profs, and if you have the means to do so, to volunteer in labs, to be able to do data entry, to do something to get that additional experience. No, most people don't pass up free hours from a motivated, you know, student that will help in their lab, right? If there's other ways to get it, at least that research experience. I know some people who were peers that didn't get into grad school the first time would sometimes take a research coordinator job and then work for a year and then reapply to grad school. So again, they didn't necessarily have a master's an honors thesis, but they were able to get that research experience elsewhere or a different way. So sometimes those are other options. I don't know, maybe there's other ideas, but that's what popped to my head.
So if there aren't other recommendations, I just want to follow up with my first question. I don't know where I went. That said, can I still like graduate from undergrad and then do that research after as like a private assistant to a professor or a clinic or a hospital or something, or should it be part of my courses?
I can give one example. So I work in a hospital setting. I'm a clinician like Sarah. That's what I love to do. And and I don't really see myself as a researcher, but I put together programs, and one of the questions was, well, how well do they work, and how can we find out if they're as good as they're supposed to be? So I was lucky to have a student from U of T who did an independent study project. So he had reached out to me and said he wanted to do some research and what was the clinical work I'm doing, and met with me and came up with an idea, and we figured out, what instruments we had to give. And it wasn't a randomized controlled trial, but it was a good pilot, which he actually got published. So, in the end, if you have some interest in one area or another and find who's doing work in it in the city, and call them up and find out, are they testing the efficacy of their program, and what are the instruments they're using, and could they use your help in running a field study? So there are ways to do it. And I would say psychology will always be very data driven. It's one of the things I'm proud of about psychology. So I don't think avoiding research is the ideal way to get into mainstream psychology. You might consider social work. You do a lot of good clinical stuff, but they don't often require the research piece. So there are other options, but I think in psychology, you're gonna always bump up against, you've got to know how to handle data, how to read it, how to understand the meaning of it, and how to publish it. And that's largely what it is.
Yeah, thank you so much for the responses. And I for other students, I've also heard that if we pursue the PsyD degree, they are less focused on research being a very critical aspect. So that could be also another avenue. But thank you so much. Thanks.
Yeah, that is true. And actually, my office mate finished at Rutgers in the US and has a PsyD. So there are programs. I don't know there's any in Canada. There may now be, but there are a few in the States. So there are those options too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reitav. And I will move on to Anthony for the next question.
Hello, I think my question is more for Trisha, but anyone else feel free to chime in. What would be the difference from going to like an Adler or a Yorkville versus a more traditional university? Because I feel like at those schools are more driven just to teach you the degree and maybe not doing as much research. So do you feel like there's any pros and cons of going to one of those schools instead? Thank you.
I would say definitely for me, I would say pro for Adler, smaller classes, more intimate setting, and again, very specific, I guess, focus when it came to, again, community engagement, social justice work, right? And wanting to do advocacy in your work as well. Especially with our socio-political climate right now, I was very prepared for it, right? So I would say if that is what you want, you're wanting to look into, Adler or Yorkville, I'm sure Shlomo will talk about Yorkville, but I would say that would be one of the reasons to go for Adler School. Whereas the bigger universities will have more specialized programs, and you'll be able to connect with professors that, will want to talk about neuro, psychology, and would want to go into like specializing with neurodiversity, for example, or, different things like that. So it's a broader, range of information that you can get. More clinically at a bigger university, whereas at Adler, for sure, it's more focused in on very specific types of programs.
Yeah, I would say basically the same things. My experience at Yorkville, research wasn't a component. I mean, there's your classic research methods course, but not doing much research. the real strength of Yorkville for me was just the very practical focus on here are the basic counseling skills. Here's how you can get started in providing counseling and psychotherapy to clients. So it is much more focused in that way. And also the outcomes with Yorkville and Adler would be that you're going to be a registered psychotherapist as opposed to a psychologist, which is you would need a research program for that, I believe.
Thank you so much. I'll just pass it on to Shreya right now to go over the messages, to the question in the chat box. If you could please, Shreya, go over, do you have the questions from the chat box?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there was a question that specifically asks like what type of research work may boost applicants' background for their master's application?
I mean, I think it sometimes helps if you're doing something in a related field. That being said, I did 2 research projects in social psychology and then went into a clinical developmental program. And then I switched into a clinical neuropsych program. So really, you know, I think they want to see that you can do research and that you're willing and open and hardworking and all of those things. If you have something that's sort of related, I think showing a passion for what you've done can go even further than sometimes the content, right? We're not expecting, I don't think anybody's expecting that out of your honors thesis, you will have solved a big something, you know, something little that is passionate, that you can passionately talk about and that you're interested and you show that you're motivated and thoughtful and can do some research, maybe more than the content of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think persistence is a big thing that you can show. So I'm always impressed by students that start with, you know, maybe something they did in a course and then they did an independent project on it and figured out they wanted to do a study and then found a faculty member they could do a study with. And then they presented it as a poster somewhere and then finally got it published. That's, I think, a really good looking CV. That's somebody who's taken something, they're passionate about it, and they followed it through all the way through to getting it out into the community and other people seeing what they found. And I agree with Sarah, it doesn't have to be Nobel Prize winning. Almost everything we do is not winning Nobel Prizes, so that's okay. But it's incredibly helpful to understand people. So yeah, find something you're passionate about and keep following that.
That reminded me, so I do want to say that Adler does encourage a master's thesis at the end of your program. So there is research going on there. So exactly what Jaan said, you know, you do your master's thesis, and I think right now all master's theses are published after, so you get some publication after too.
Also remember that you have to do this for a long time. So you want to like it. You're probably not going to like it as much when you finished it. This is being real, especially if you go in and do your master's or like, God forbid, your PhD thesis. You're going to be looking at it for so many years. You're not at the end, something you like, but not something you love, because you won't love it at the end. But the fact that you can persevere and that you're going to be sitting with it for a really long time, you know, just like what you're doing.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. So the next person would, Diana, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you. So I'm just wondering, due to my own personal life experiences, I would say that working with children and medical trauma situations would be my primary area of focus for psychology. So for Dr. Tuck, I'm just wondering, how would you describe a typical day in your career, and what do you dislike about it? Specifically, what would you say would be the hardest part of connecting with a pediatric patient?
Kids are easy. It's the parents. Don't forget the parents. I was so dumb. I went into clinical developmental psychology because I wanted to be with children all day long because I'm a large child. And then I realized that like half or more of my practice is working with parents. So if you don't like working with parents, don't work with children. So if I can say that like loud and clear at an undergrad level, think about this, okay? Because it is 100%, because you get so often a child that is dropped in your office and say, okay, fix my child. I don't like the way that but the child has a system figured out. It's maladaptive to the entire family system, but it's working for the child. The child is sleeping in the parent's bed. It's driving the parents crazy, but it's working for the kid, right? So we're not going to, at Rock, it is a very family focused approach to treatment and consultation, because I always look at short-term, long-term, the short-term kid has figured things out very well. We need to look at the family system and what has to change within the whole family in order to address the problem. In terms of medically specifically, I don't work with the medical population anymore. I'm not in the hospital setting. But when I was at Sick Kids, I did a year in neurology. So that was my specialty, was non-surgical epilepsy. And I also saw other kind of developmental conditions that were brain-based, right? That's what a neuropsychologist does. We do more brain-based conditions. So I would interview, I would do a tiny bit of testing. I had a psychometrist that did most of my testing at Sick Kids. I did a lot of report writing, some research. I got to interact with the kids, but a lot of it is report writing. So if you it's a lot of writing in terms of assessment. At Rocket Community Mental Health, I do actually most of my own testing, which is long, but I love it because I love working with the kids as well. So I do interviewing online now. I do all my interviewing online. I do my testing in person because online testing sucks. I did it for a while, and the kids I see have such high needs. So I see a lot of complex mental health combined sometimes with developmental. So we'll see very high functioning autism with depression, anxiety, or I'll see someone with prenatally exposed to drugs and alcohol. So there may be kind of intellectual disability, or even actually often average IQ, but lots of deficits in terms of behavioral and emotional regulation issues. And so those kids with really high needs in terms of attention and behavioral regulation, try to test them online. Let's see how it goes, right? They disappear, they run away. So I do a lot of testing in person still, and I love it. And if you can get a kid to smile after you're torturing them with psychological tests for hours at a time, then it's actually a good thing. What I love about my job is I find that if I can do a small piece to make something easier. So I always think of myself like the grandparent. I don't do a lot of the actual therapy work. I do all the assessments. So I prime people for treatment. I prime people for whatever comes next. I try to do a very therapeutic assessment where I am kind of getting them ready for next steps, whether it be interventions at the school and helping them with learning and social adjustment, or getting them ready for treatment and therapists. We have many wonderful therapists at my organization. So kind of building some expectations and consulting about next steps and just validating their experiences and their bravery in going through things like that. So although I don't do a lot of therapy anymore, I use my therapy background in my assessment. And that is a day in the life of me. And then I go home and kids yell at me, and I feed them, and then they stop.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Diana, for your question. I'm going to be reading a question from the chat since they're not able to unmute themselves. So they ask that, will work experience help application to master's and PhD programs? I'm a mature student and currently work as a child and youth worker in a residential treatment. We apply a DBT model to treatment. Would this help give a leg up for my applications?
Yeah, I would say for sure. I mean, if you've worked in the field, if you've got exposure to different problem situations, patients, clients, agency work, volunteer work, that's really helpful. It's also helpful just to figure out if you like it. mean, you have to like it because some of it is really demanding and really hard. But it can be hard in a way that you're okay with. But if it's hard in a way that you're not okay with, or you take it personally, or you go home with it, you have to be able to leave the problems behind. And I learned that in the first year of being in the York Counselling Center, that it's hard. It's very hard. But you know what? If you've had the work experience, that stands you in really good stead. It would be helpful if you get a letter of reference from somebody who knows and watches what you've done and appreciates that you're ethical and you're sensitive. And all of those things are hugely important for grad schools.
Thank you. This is just to let you all know that we have 10 minutes remaining for question and answer panel. We'll try to get through all the hands as soon as possible. Jama, you can go next with your question.
Hey everybody, I have a quick question. So when you're applying for grad school, does it help being like a minority in terms of the application process? Like do some schools do like a quota, I hate to use that term, for a certain amount of ethical backgrounds? Yeah.
Well, I'm guessing that none of the four people on the panel can answer that because we don't accept anybody for master's or PhD programs. But I'm sure that they're very open to inclusive, process in their application. So it's not going to hurt you. You still have to have all of the other requirements, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know about quotas. It's a good question.
I can't speak to admittance to grad school. What I can talk about is residency programs are not taking quota. They don't do quotas, but they are looking at ways to make everything more inclusive and more fair based on circumstance. So they have different models that they're trying to look at, because people, for example, who have parents funding them through, school, and they don't have debt and things like that, we look at how poorly paid residency programs are, and can people afford to do these things. So they're trying to make it more inclusive for everyone. But in terms of quotas, nobody talks about quotas, and I don't know is the bottom line, but they're working on making sure that there is more equity, but it's a long process. It's not good yet.
Yeah, no, agree. I haven't heard of any quotas so far, but I do think that, like everybody said, they're really trying to make things more diverse and inclusive. But I think what would help is, again, researching the school, finding out, what they're about. And if you find that they do have research and programming surrounding, something that would, be diverse, equitable, inclusive, then it's more likely that they will be looking for applicants that match that. So definitely research the school is going to be very important.
Yeah, I asked that because I was actually looking at, I'm African American and Indigenous, and a few schools had mentioned like a quota for Indigenous students that I was looking at. And then I was wondering, like, so York has the specialized honors thesis program, and I'm wondering how important that is, that experience, to get into like a master's program. Would you guys suggest it? I also have like work experience in addiction counseling, which kind of helps my resume as well. And to answer somebody's question, I think it was like David, he was saying he wanted to get into addiction counseling. He didn't have any experience, just lived experience. I got into that field with just lived experience. So it's possible.
Thank you for answering that. In regards to the I believe you're talking about whether you did the bachelor's with honors or not. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like the specialized honors thesis program.
So I did do that and applied to my master's with the specialized honors program. However, I have heard from other students at Yorkville that they just did the 3-year version of the bachelor's and they were still accepted. So it doesn't seem to be a hard requirement for the master's programs, at least.
And as we talked about before, I think it can help to get that experience and build that experience in, but as long as you get research experience kind of in a different way, that can also work. I used to TA the specialist masters, whatever, a gazillion years ago. And I do think that the teaching about the stats and going through the process of the project and having people, TAs and the professor to help, anyway, who was the prof for me, they were great at helping the students through the project. So there is the advantage of doing it that way because it is a direct route, but you can do it other ways.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm trying. I really want to get into that program. So that's my plan.
Thank you. Daniela, if you want to go next. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
No, don't worry, you pronounced it right. Sorry if I stumble on my words. I don't usually participate in these kinds of things, but I guess my question is, as someone who's leaning more towards the counseling / like psychotherapy route, and I'm slowly trying to build up my experience for my master's application, what advice would you personally give for those who are trying to get their foot in the door and getting exposure and finding places to volunteer? Because it's great to sit here and say like, oh, find places to like volunteer and get experience and stuff, but there's just so much out there, and a lot of places that you can get exposure, they even require you to already have experience. So for somebody who's still in school, what would you suggest for somebody who's trying to find that experience?
When I was at York, I know there were different bulletins sent out every now and then with different volunteer opportunities. That's actually how I got, I had a really great volunteer opportunity at a place called the CDI Child Development Institute. I know actually that particular place still accepts a lot of volunteers each year. So that's just one option off the bat. And I'll put it in the chat box as well so you can take a look. But I would check out if York is sending out any bulletins, I would check that. And I would also look at different job boards. If you search volunteer psychology, you put it in, there's all these different options that pop up every now and then. And it might take 50 applications until you find something, but it's worth applying for.
I'd also say that I did the same thing that you did. And I found a place, I think it was a pregnancy care center, but I was specifically looking for things that aligned with me and my values and what it is that I was interested in. So that can really narrow it down, and it can give a really strong application if, again, it aligns with you and what you want to do. So I wanted to work with families, and I wanted to learn more about grief and loss, and how that impacts women that lose children to abortion and stuff like that, right? Or considering abortion. So if that's something you're interested in, you'll put in a really good application to get that job, right? Or to volunteer at that place. So so if you want information about that, I think it's very close to the campus as well. So Pregnancy Care Center, I think it's on Yonge and somewhere. So yeah. That's another place you can think of.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think that this might be the time for the last question, and after that we'll have to end our question and answer panel. Olivia, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. I had a question regarding specifically psychotherapy, and just what does your day-to-day look like specifically with, do you assess the patients that do come in? Do you create treatment plans for them? Do you have to work with a clinical psychologist? Just kind of what your day-to-day in that aspect looks like.
So we, as psychotherapists, we can't do assessments. This is just so that Dr. Reitav and Dr. Tuck don't report us. But we are allowed. I'm just kidding. We're allowed to do case conceptualization. So we definitely, with every person coming in, you have to have some sort of framework that you're using to decide what is going on here and what am I doing. So every time I meet with someone for a first session, there would be a process of trying to figure out, what's happening for them, and then from there making a treatment plan that I would, refine as I continue to work together. In terms of the day-to-day work, it's seeing clients and getting coffee to help me see the clients.
Oh gosh, I'll follow that. We're similar fields. So yes, definitely cannot diagnose. We cannot, perform anything like that. And you actually have to say that to clients if they ask about assessments, if you're a psychotherapist or a counselor. So make sure you do indicate that I cannot provide any diagnoses at this point, and refer them to, Jaan and Sarah. But then day to day, I would say, yes, you have to go through what I do. So new client, I have a new client first session, I will do my informed consent form. That's going to be a contract that we have together. We're sharing, what is expected of them and what's expected of me, and we're going through confidentiality and such. And then we do an intake form where I'm getting all their personal information and asking about, questions that are going to help me to be able to determine what's going on for this person. I also do a therapeutic plan that gives me more detailed information about what their presenting problems. And I'll ask about goals. So I'll do some goal setting with them. And if they like, I sometimes suggest, these are some tools that I have in my toolbox that I think will help you to achieve your goals. This is sort of like a semi treatment planning in the first session, but like Shlomo said, it sort of evolves over time. When you're working with them, you add more tools that will help them as you go along. So that's the first session. And then after that, it's really just you're checking in the beginning of the session. You're asking what is it that they would like to talk about, right? And then you're ending the session with a wrap up. And that's sort of what a regular day looks like.
Yeah, and I could add a little bit to that because although I can do testing and I have patients who start with me, my whole practice is pretty well psychotherapy. That's what I do day in and day out. I see probably about 25 people a week, half of them in the hospital, half of them in my private office. And I do give them a whole range of tests. These are more paper and pencil things. COVID has changed everything, I think, for everyone. I do all of my work virtually now. I hardly ever get out of the house. Even the hospital work I can do from home because it's all done by Zoom or Microsoft Teams or the Ontario Telehealth Network. So all of those things make it easy to reach out for people and for people to start therapy. And my practice is different now in that I'm seeing people from, one end of the province to the other, whereas I used to see people who could kind of drive down to my office within a half an hour, an hour or so. So I think psychotherapy that's what I always wanted to do. That's what I'm doing now. And you have to love it because it's exhausting. By the end of the day, I'm kind of numbed out and, I need to do at least an hour of just staring at the TV or talking to my wife or doing absolutely nothing that requires 4 brain cells working at the same time. So, but it is really, really rewarding. And I used to have the image that individual therapy was great because you get to change somebody's life and get them to go back into, whatever challenges they were having. And sometimes what you realize is as you get them better, that now they're having problems at work with the coworkers who are putting them down, and now they're standing up for themselves, and it's causing friction at work. And now there's problems with their partner because they didn't used to do this and now they're doing it. So it's I kind of smiled when Sarah talked about, you're working with kids, but no, you actually have to deal with the parents. When you're working with the individual, you have to work with everybody that their lives touch as well. At some point, it becomes an issue. So, but it's incredibly rewarding. I think the other thing that I've learned about doing this work is that you're always learning. I mean, I'm going to workshops every year. I'm writing a book now, and I'm reading more than I ever read when I was doing my PhD. So it is something that's incredibly exciting, lots of fun, very rewarding, but it is a lot of work. So if you're up for the work, go for it. It's incredibly rewarding as a career.
And I'm so happy there are people like Jaan and Trisha and Shlomo that do like all the therapy. I don't talk to a neuropsychologist about assessment because we can't shut up about it, right? We love it. There's a reason that we go into it. And I actually started working at Rock because I had all this therapy training and I wasn't able to use it in the hospital. And in community mental health, I would have the opportunity to do therapy. And they gave me the same presentation of the most complex case that nobody else wanted to see over and over and over again. So then after my second mat leave, I decided I'm not doing it anymore. And so that's why I do consultation and assessment. But it is the work, the therapy is so hard, like it can be so draining and so rewarding. And you need to keep in mind like the self-care and things like that. I don't do it currently. I do a little bit, I dabble to make sure that I still remember how, but I don't do it as what I mostly do. But don't knock assessment. Seriously, it's really fun too. And if you have a passion for puzzles and figuring out how to make a kid's life or an individual's life a little bit easier, and just providing a validating experience that highlights not only their areas of needs, but their strengths, and to have that self-knowledge about the person, it can be really great too. So that's my plug for assessment as well. So.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope that answered your question, Olivia. And okay, so as much as I hate to say it, we have come to the end of this question and answer panel. I am so amazed by all the questions all the participants have asked, and I am so grateful for all the panelists for answering everyone's question with so much honesty, vulnerability, and like your experience is so valued to all of us. We really appreciate all of your time. And I really apologize to all the questions we weren't able to get into in today's, like the time was a little limited, but hopefully we will be uploading the events recording very soon on our YouTube channel. And there'll also be an informational brochure that will go out to all the registrants of this event. So a lot of information and points will be summarized for all of you to get back to whenever you need to. So I really hope that this event was educational for all of you all here, and thank you so much again for joining us. Ali, do you mind sharing the slide? Yeah. Okay, so we have a small activity where if you're able to, can you please take your mobile device and go to slido.com. This is just a small activity for all of us just to end the event with.
Just to chime in, I'll just add, thank you so much. Thank you to all the people who've been patiently waiting and asking all the questions. Yeah, like while you're joining the activity, I just wanted to let you know that we're grateful for each and one of you who's here today, for the panelists, for the people who have been asking the questions, for being patient. Thank you, everyone. And we hope you stick around for the activity and the feedback form and also the photo.
Okay, could I just get a thumbs up if once you're all like into like, so if you go to slido.com, you can just enter the code that is 326367. There'll just be a question where you could just like it's just basically asking how much you were able to take away from this event today. And once you're done with it, you can just give me a thumbs up.
I'll just go ahead and share my screen for this slide activity.
Connie's, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just saying, could people join using the link and the code? I will go ahead and share my screen.
Also, if anyone has any questions left, you can put in the chat, and if the speakers would like to answer in the chat, that would be great as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone who joined and answered. As far as I can see, there are a lot of people who are actually benefited from the event, and they did have a good understanding between clinic and counseling, as you can see. So yeah, thank you so much. And with that, we will move on to the next part of the presentation. So before you leave, we would like to take some photos to remember this event. If you are comfortable to be in the photos, that is, please stick around, or else please feel free to turn your cameras off. But I would request you not to leave just yet so that we can provide the feedback forms. One of our marketing members will let us know when they're ready to take the photo. And I really hope that we can capture every one of us who's here today.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. My name is Dennis. I'm a marketing coordinator with UPSA. So if you guys are comfortable, like Kenny said, you can turn on your camera for the photos, and feel free to also use like a video filter or a fun filter for your camera. So I'll just set that up and I'll count down for when I'll take a picture. Is everyone ready? Awesome. 3, 2, 1, smile. Awesome. And one more. 3, 2, 1, smile. All right. Thank you so much. And I will pass it back to our MCs.
Okay, with that, we will move on to the feedback form. Thank you for taking the photo. We will be providing the feedback form. And Holly, if you could share your screen again, thank you so much. With this, I will just ask everyone to please take some time out. You guys took a lot of time out to be here today and with all your questions. So it would be, we would be grateful, as a matter of fact, to have your feedback on how we did and how the event was for every one of you. Please take some time to fill up the feedback form, and please make sure to follow UPSA on our social media. All our information are shared there. And last but not the least, thank you. Big round of applause. I hope we all can give a big round of Zoom applause for all our panelists who are here today, who provided their valuable time, your insight, and I am more than sure that a lot of us could, we will be benefited from all your information, all the experiences. They're just priceless. So thank you. And with that, Zoom round of applause, everyone. And yes, thank you once again for being with us today. Thank you from the UPSA team. If anyone has trouble accessing the feedback form or anything, please let us know so we can help you with that.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening and good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
you. Thanks so much. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
If anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to answer, but otherwise, I think we can move everyone who's not an UPSA member into the waiting room. Going once, going twice. Okay. I'm gonna move everyone who I don't know into the waiting room. I think that's it.
All right. Great job, everyone. Sorry to
Great job, everyone. Sorry, go ahead, Ayla.
No, it was just saying great job to everyone. Does anyone have any like feedback they want to give, or are we just good to go?
I just want to thank everyone who was here today. Thank you to the marketing team. Thank you, Core. Thank you, marketing. Without your help, the last minute everything. Thank you, everyone. A round of applause won't be enough. So a big heart to everyone who contributed. Yeah. Thank you.
You can stop recording now.
Yeah, I forgot to do that.
This will be good for the bloopers.